G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Modern Women's Podcast with ATP Science. And you are with your host, Elizma, Nicole, and our very special guest, Marty Kendall, who I've known for quite a few years. Marty, we're so excited to have you on the podcast finally. You got into this game because of...
my wife, Monica, type 1 diabetic, and I suppose when we got married, even she didn't understand much about diabetes. And then when we decided to start thinking about having children, it was like, how do we dial in her nutrition to minimise the complications? And then that sort of snowballed from there to try and understand how we can stabilise her blood sugar, insulin, and then from there it was dial in nutrient density and satiety to tailored nutrition for different goals. You know, not everybody wants to lose weight or manage diabetes. Some people want to gain weight or perform as an athlete or different goals. So it's been a quest to engineer, analyse nutrition to understand how to dial it in for different goals.
And like Monica was still, when we met, 20 years ago or so, not to give our age away, it was still that kind of like, with type 1 diabetics, it was the high carb diets and things like that was still pushed.
Yeah, she was always told to eat carbohydrates with every meal and dose with insulin for that. But then turning that on its head, it's like, how can we stabilise insulin and make better food choices that require less insulin to stabilise blood sugars? And that gets you off the blood sugar roller coaster, and once it's stable you can just control it, and life is a whole lot better, and the quality of life from her is incredibly different. And big credit to you for helping us as well. We used to go along and I used to listen in, and Monica could come home and say, nobody's told me and taught me as much as Elizma did in those few sessions, so thank you.
Oh, no, thank you.
Mutual admiration society we've got going.
I think so. And I think it's good to mention as well, I mean, you've been on so many podcasts, so many conferences, as an engineer, you just broke into the whole nutritional circuit and blew everyone away in terms of, you myth bust a whole bunch of stuff that's still kind of around, but people are now starting to question. And it's just because you're very, very statistically and numbers driven, you look at statistics, you look at numbers, you measure and you see what's actually going on, which I just find, inspirational.
I just see data and I see graphs and it makes sense to me, and it's like, why doesn't everybody see it this way? And I put it out there and people, understand it, and it's just been a journey of continuing to communicate that.
Awesome. And you've written 2 books. One is Big Fat Keto Lies, and the other one is Data-Driven Fasting.
Yeah, Data-Driven Fasting manual we've got, and that's been a fun journey to see that take off, and it's, really a thrill, enjoying the ride.
Awesome. So what's one of the biggest, I know there's probably a lot, but what is probably one of the biggest myths in this whole journey that you feel needed to be, I guess, challenged, and it's the most prevalent?
Yeah, I suppose the misunderstanding over the last 5 years, people have jumped on the keto bandwagon thinking that, keto or die, keto or bust, I've got to get my ketones higher, and definitely moving away from the carb-fat combo foods that are low in protein and basically hyperpalatable and drive us to overeat a whole lot more food. Is a good thing. Once you shift either side of that danger zone, you definitely improve your appetite. So once you reduce your carbohydrates, satiety improves, you eat less, and it's like magic. But it's not necessarily about the ketones that are really often a side effect of weight loss. As you lose weight, you lose body fat and you burn your own body fat. But exogenous ketones, loading up on a whole lot of extra MCT oil to get those ketones higher, is not necessarily the ideal way to gain health, and can often lead to worsening metabolic health. And over the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of people, as they actually improve their metabolic health, the ketones actually decrease. And if you continue to chase those ketones, you potentially just keep on loading up on more and more nutrient poor, low satiety fat, which is not going to get you where you want in the long run.
That's really interesting, because that's what a lot of people do, right? Is they chase the ketones, and they think the more the color changes on their urine strips, the more weight they're losing. And you mentioned about the exogenous ketones as well. MCT oil being an exogenous ketone is like, well, it may have therapeutic benefits and things like seizures and things like that.
There's definitely a role for therapeutic ketosis for people who need it for epilepsy Alzheimer's, dementia, but most people want keto for weight loss and improved metabolic health, and that's not what, they don't need the continually elevated ketone levels, and most of the time they decrease after a couple of weeks anyway. So.
Yeah. And there was something that I noticed about the relationship between ketones and fat or weight loss. Not weight loss, insulin. That was the thing.
Yeah.
So is there like a relationship between ketones and insulin? Can ketones, because there's a belief that fat does not affect insulin levels.
Yeah.
But is that really true?
It's definitely complex and interesting. That's what I've tried to dig into. In a starvation situation, when you go for longer without food, your blood sugars decrease, you don't have as much glucose, so your body produces ketones from the stored body fat when you have less carbs and less protein. Basically, you have less oxaloacetate to work in the Krebs cycle, so you default to ketosis, which should be all over. But if you start loading up with extra MCT oil or exogenous ketones, your body basically says, I've got this stored energy, but I've got all this energy coming in from my diet. I need to shut off the release of that stored energy. So you do that by raising insulin, which is basically the way your body regulates the release of stored energy. So just jamming in more and more energy over the longer term is going to raise your insulin. Carbs raise your insulin in the short term, protein in the medium term, and sort of fat over the longer term. But any calories over any time frame is going to raise your insulin as your body says, I need to burn off the energy that's coming in from my diet. I'm going to stop the release of fat from my body. So just to keep on chasing higher and higher ketones with more and more fat, which is nutrient poor, low satiety, is going to leave you potentially more insulin resistant over the long term. And definitely you see that with type 1 diabetics who have chased ketones. They can double their insulin dose, and once they go back to a nutrient-dense, protein-focused, nutrient-focused, high satiety diet, they'll halve their total daily insulin dose. So a lot of the time when you look at a type 1's insulin requirements, most of it is basal, especially if they're on a low-carb diet. So that means that 80% of the insulin required each day is just to hold their fat in storage. And if you fast, your insulin requirements go down, and maybe 20% is just, when you eat, your body releases a bit more insulin to say, I'm going to use the energy that's coming in from my diet at the moment. And carbohydrates will raise that more in the short term. But definitely, the more body fat you have, the more insulin you have. So the question is then, how do we dial in your diet and what you eat, when you eat, to be able to, carry less body fat, more power to weight ratio, more lean mass, less body fat, so you can decrease your overall insulin in your body, reverse insulin resistance. And the solution to reversing insulin resistance is really reversing energy toxicity, which is a high satiety, nutrient-dense diet upstream. So that's the secret.
It's that whole glucotoxicity and fatty acid toxicity in the cells. Just like you said, if the cells are, you can only handle so much glucose or energy, and then it stops it from getting into the cells, and it's got to be stored somewhere.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about insulin toxicity and insulin as the enemy, but really, insulin is just a downstream effect that your body has of excess energy in the system. And it's how do we eat in a way, what do we eat, when do we eat in a way that will enable us to reduce that energy toxicity over the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's where the keto diet falls down, and one of your keto lies is you just have to eat more fat to burn more fat.
Yeah.
And that's where I think people start to see issues when they're on the keto diet, and they either stop losing weight or they start to actually put on weight, because this is the twofold. They're eating the fat and having that effect, and also they're eating these nutrient devoid foods as well. So
and they're really yummy. You can keep on eating them.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're just eating the cream and the bacon, and they're loading up and thinking it's great, and it's really having a negative effect.
And that often works in the early stages of the low carb keto diet, when you move away from the donuts and the milk chocolate and the croissants, and moving to a bacon and butter and cheese and cream really helps you move away from that danger zone of complete junk food. But once you stabilise your blood sugars, what then? You need to dial back your dietary fat to burn body fat.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing with people too, because they are on that highly processed, high sugar diet, and they move to keto and they do lose all that weight, and they think, oh, it's the high fat. Is it, or is it the fact they've taken out all those other foods, and then, as you say, as they stabilise, and their weight can start going up again? So that's a big downfall with people.
Yeah,
definitely.
And I remember there was recently a little bit of on your Facebook page, because one of the great things about you is that you mentioned it in your the book, The Big Fat Keto Lies, is that a lot of diets get sects. It's like a religion, and they get sects, and then you have different versions of keto, different versions of paleo, and if anything dare challenge my belief in what I believe is the right diet, people get very sensitive about it. And one of the topics that was discussed was about fat being energy dense. That you can't just eat all the fat that you want and still lose weight.
Yeah, definitely.
Still a lot of calories.
And that bulletproof coffee is really satiating, but you just polished off 1,000 calories, and that's why you're so full, because you've got your half your day's worth of energy.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's not about calorie counting, is it, Marty?
Oh, well, energy balance is always a thing.
Yeah.
And, but, it's really hard to manage, to track. You got your Fitbit, you got your MyFitnessPal, and you think you've got control over it. But anytime you outsource your satiety to a smartphone or an app, you lose track of your own hunger signals. And we've found that dialing in macros, probably, prioritizing protein, which is really about dialing back the energy poor fat and carbohydrate, is the first step, and then focusing on nutrient density is the kill punch to maximise satiety, to enable you to not need to track everything. And we always eat as much as we want to feel satiated. None of us can track and stay starving forever. Eventually you get to the point where it's just like, I need the food, and I'm just gonna you've restrained yourself for so long, your lizard brain, your instincts that want to force you to survive kick in. So it's a way of, how do I give my lizard brain what it needs when it needs it, so it just settles back and goes into the corner and goes back to sleep and doesn't make a mess of my whole life.
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing too with the calorie counting, and you did touch on it in your book about it can create an eating disorder. And I see that a lot with clients, and they become so focused on the calories and tracking every single day that it becomes a stress in itself, and then it becomes counterproductive, and they develop these issues. So, and eating to satiety should be a natural thing for us. We shouldn't have to be tracking it, every day.
It's definitely about what you eat primarily, and if you go and I ate 800 calories of donuts, but I'm still hungry. It's like, it's what you ate. It's not how much you ate.
And that's where a calorie is not just a calorie, right?
No, definitely. So, they have massive different satiety effects in our body. And if you look at it from a evolutionary context, the foods that were available in autumn that enabled us to get fat for winter are those rare foods of, the nuts that are a fat and carb combo that are very, very rare in nature, except for that particular season. And then in winter you've got protein and a bit of fat, which is sort of a low carb keto approach. You come into spring, you've got a protein spring modified fast, protein and fiber, and then you go into summer and you've got plenty of carbs, and you're back into autumn. But our whole food system has worked out that it's so much more profitable to just keep marketing us autumnal foods that drive this appetite that keeps the body just going, we need to prepare for winter.
Yeah, so we're constantly in summer mode, aren't we?
You're always in that autumn phase, just wanting to eat more and more and more and more. And you can't switch off that instinct that is telling you winter's coming, but winter never really comes. We're always just perpetually flooded with this, hyper palatable, refined starches, refined sugars, refined oils. And, it's cheap, it's profitable, but it's not good for us. And
I think that's because you mentioned the word nutrient density. So what do we mean by nutrient density?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about it, and there's been a whole bunch of different approaches before. Joel Fuhrman defined it in a certain way in his approach, and then Matt Lalonde came along and said, look, let's just look at the essential nutrients, including protein. But I sort of picked that up and went, Matt, you needed to do a whole lot more work to continue this, and tried to refine it to the point of saying you need a certain amount of each nutrient. It's typically ideally more than the minimum required by the dietary recommended intakes, but you need all of those nutrients. So we've devised a system that quantifies nutrient density based on getting all those 34 essential nutrients. The amino acids particularly are highly satiating, but also vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids. So you can quantify that and make sure your diet is nutrient dense, and we've sort of systematized it with a multi-criteria analysis approach to make sure that you can prioritize the foods and meals that will provide more of the nutrients that you need to get more of.
Yeah.
So.
And that's important because you're so right. When we talked about the calories of a donut and then they're still hungry, it's if you don't get the vitamins and the minerals and those requirements in, your body will still say, I need more magnesium, I need more calcium, and you'll just keep eating, but you're eating the wrong food sources.
Yeah, and we've gone through all those different nutrients and quantified it, and you see, as people get more protein in percentage terms per calorie, the satiety kicks in, and then similar with magnesium, potassium, sodium, then all the other nutrients. There's a certain point where the satiety response bottoms out. You go, okay, that's probably enough, and your body then goes in search of foods that contain more of those other nutrients that you still need more of.
Yeah.
It's a really unique solution for each person. It's, what is the optimal food for me is very unique to each individual based on what they're currently eating.
Yeah, that's what I love. That's what we were talking about. Everybody's different, and you can't put someone on a particular diet and expect them all to have the same result. And that's what I love about the Nutrient Optimizer is it does change to when your needs change. And I think, and we need to be more flexible in what we're doing with our dieting and that sort of stuff. And as I said to Elizma, it's like in naturopathy, you can have 3 people with the same condition. You can't give them all the same treatment because they're all going to react differently.
Yeah.
And it's the same with your food that you're taking in and what you're doing at the time and that sort of thing. So I think that's really important.
And so I guess that's the premise of data-driven fasting, isn't it, Marty? It's like, it's about measurements and getting a baseline, and then kind of like seeing where you're at and knowing when to eat and when not to eat. And you made a very, very good point in the book that you have to measure glucose before a meal and not after a meal, and everyone measures it after a meal. So explain that a little bit.
Yeah, we in keto and low carb and diabetes land, we focus on how much your blood sugar rises after you eat and try to eat to stabilize that. And a lot of the time that drives people to the extreme in keto of avoiding all carbohydrate, swapping that for fat, and potentially even avoiding protein because that can have an insulin effect. So, but I noticed that over time that can really lead people to a nutrient-poor, low-satiety dietary approach. So really, when you look at Monica's blood sugar all day and you see what she eats and when she doesn't eat and when she does eat a lot, you see that, what really matters is your blood sugar before you eat. It's really, your blood sugar is a really reactive fuel gauge to what you're eating and when you need to eat again. So it's just the perfect little fuel gauge to know, do I need to eat now or do I need to wait? If you look at Moni's blood sugars, she'll look at a continuous glucose monitor and say, well, I don't really need to eat right now. I need to delay my food until it comes down a little bit. So, and that can work for normal people who don't have type 1 diabetes, and often the CGM can give them a lot of data that confuses the heck out of them. But by just going, do I feel hungry? Yes. Do I really need to refuel? Check my blood sugar. It's below my baseline. Yes, I do need to refuel. Or it's above. No, maybe I did have a big piece of cheesecake and I can delay a little bit longer. So that's pretty much how the whole data-driven fasting system works. It balances what you eat with when you eat.
And I love the word fuel gauge, like that your blood sugar is your fuel gauge, because we talked about glucotoxicity and fat toxicity and all of that. So that tells us, can our cells get more energy to burn for fuel, right? And so if we talk about it, using it as a fuel gauge, what are we kind of like looking at? We get let's say we get our baseline. Is there a perfect time of the day to get a baseline?
In baselining, it's a matter of, do I feel hungry? When do I normally eat? And you just measure that for yourself. There's no particular one number that'll work for some people, because if they've got type 2 diabetes, their baseline blood sugar before they eat will be way higher. But for people who are metabolically healthy, it might be lower, but it still works as a fuel gauge to help guide their meal timing to bring it down a little bit over time.
And the meal timing, is that kind of like when the blood sugar starts to drop a little bit? Is that when you should supposed to eat?
So you work out your baseline, maybe it's 6 millimole per litre or 120 milligrams per deciliter in that baselining period, and then you just check whether you're currently hungry, whether your blood sugar is below your trigger, and then you decide based on that whether you need to eat or can wait a little bit longer. If it's above your trigger, then you just wait until it's below and you actually need to refuel.
Yep. Mm. And then in terms of fasting, because we're talking about waiting before you eat again, before your body needs fuel, is there such a thing as fasting for too long?
Yeah, I think everybody, like anything, we're thinking if a little bit is good, more is better. And the problem with fasting really is that if you fast for more than you're used to, whether that be 3 hours because you eat all the time, or 5 days because you tried to be a hero, and you get to that point. I know when I did a lot of fasting, you just come home and you're just starving, and you're reaching for the butter and the peanut butter and the yogurt, and you just keep on eating until your lizard brain settles down again and you're not hungry anymore. And at that point, you don't choose the chicken and broccoli or the really healthy, nutrient-dense, high-protein foods. You just go for the energy-dense, nutrient-poor junk food because lizard brain says you deserve that now, and you just keep on eating. So potentially if you fast for too long, you don't get those nutrients that your body needs to preserve lean mass and provide satiety and all those really important things. So you need to find that balance of eating well and then delaying your meals long enough until you actually need to refuel again. So that balance of what you eat and when you eat is just critical, and you can quantify it. Not everybody needs to quantify it, but a lot of people with fasting, if they adopt a certain set window of 16/8 or whatever that work for some celebrity that you see, it doesn't always work for you because everybody's got a unique metabolism, unique schedule, unique levels of body fat, unique levels of activity, and just by measuring your fuel gauge, your blood sugar right now, you can understand whether you need to eat right now or can wait a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And is there so with the fasting, so when you're fasting and you get to that point where you are extremely hungry, obviously a lot of people don't have the ability to measure their blood sugar. So can you then push through that and go beyond it? And is that beneficial, or does that become counterproductive to what you're doing because you're then activating your stress response and cortisol and that sort of thing?
A lot of time if people fast for longer, their blood sugar will start to rise up again as they get stressed and et cetera, et cetera. So the data-driven fasting is just fasting for long enough to the point that you actually need to refuel again. And most people get to, depending on their activity, if they're really active, they might eat 2 or 3 times a day versus if they're older and more sedentary, they might eat 1 or 2 times a day just with that second meal based on the decision of is my fuel gauge still full? Do I really need to refuel now, or can I delay? And that quickly eliminates snacking, which is a big issue when you look at your blood sugar and you're still full. You don't need to eat, and once you eliminate snacking, the weight starts to fall off, and then you just keep on getting addicted to this gamified process of chasing a lower pre-meal trigger. So the key factor is that decreasing trigger over time. So you just keep on chasing a slightly lower trigger and optimizing your meal timing to continue that weight loss process. And once you decrease your glucose, because of oxidative priority, the glucose has to be burnt off first. And once you decrease your glucose, you can then work on your body fat.
Yeah.
And then that just falls away.
Because the glucose, then it's the glycogen, and then because it looks like, when I went through the book, it is very much about depleting the glucose so that you can get into those glycogen stores in the muscle and the liver, and then eventually you can start getting into your fat stores, and then just maintaining that.
Yep.
And can you train yourself to I can do a 14-hour fast, but I can't go any further. But the more I do it, then I can do a 16-hour. Because you see people that do 20-hour, like a 24 window, and they seem to be thriving. But are they going to be thriving for the long term, or is it going to start impacting them? Thyroid-wise, slowing metabolic function, or how does that?
It's interesting. I think the important thing is, are you getting the nutrients you need in that 4 hours when you're eating? And if you try to cram, try to sit down and eat 200 grams of protein and get all the nutrients you need in a 1 hour window, you're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
You just get so full on the nutrient dense foods. So a lot of people find when they start to focus on nutrient density, they drop back to a couple of eating episodes a day rather than trying to jam everything in one. So again, longer is not necessarily better.
Yeah.
And quickly the validation of your blood sugars quickly retrains your hunger. So you go, okay, this is my blood sugar, I'm below my trigger. That was a real hunger signal versus, I remember those yummy leftovers I had in the fridge, or I'm sitting in front of the TV where I always eat these chips, and you learn to differentiate your true hunger from not real hunger, and then at that point you can get on with your life and not have to track forever once you've recalibrated your hunger signals, which is really, really important.
Yeah. What about protein during fasting? Because it's really common to have the muscle loss of a lot of people doing fasting. So what are the requirements?
Absolutely critical. There's nothing about fasting that eliminates your need for protein and nutrients. Over a week, you still need to get the protein and nutrients you need. And a lot of people who do these extended fasting episodes and are proponents of fasting, the body composition deteriorates, and the people we see in data-driven fasting get the best results are the ones that pair it with nutrient-dense refeeding with the timing their meals based on the fuel gauge.
Because that's one of the keto lies, isn't it? Keto lie number 4, protein should be avoided due to gluconeogenesis. I know. So, the whole thing of, if you have protein, it's just going to turn into sugar, So that's not necessarily the case, is it?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And the people who are insulin resistant and diabetic probably need protein more because it's critical for satiety to enable them to decrease their body fat, but also because of insulin resistance and a greater level of gluconeogenesis. They're basically leaching that glucose from their protein into their bloodstream, and therefore their appetite upregulates to get more protein. So if you then avoid protein, you're just spiraling this process where you're going to be more and more hungry because of the insulin resistance, the gluconeogenesis. So what you need to do is prioritize protein and deprioritize carbs and fat to the point that you're losing weight at a sustainable rate, and that will reverse your insulin resistance over the long term.
What about on the other end of the scale, bodybuilders, that sort of thing, and the myth of, what is a lot of protein going to do to my kidneys? Because I know you touched on that with your... Yeah,
if you have a nephrologist, then talk to them about, will protein hurt my kidneys? And if you got stage 5 renal disease and on dialysis, then definitely talk to your nephrologist. But if you don't know what a nephrologist is and you don't have a personal one, then too much protein is not a problem. So everybody goes, what about my kidneys? Is too much. But people struggle to eat too much protein. The studies where they've done, eat 4.4 grams per kilo of lean body mass of protein, you can't get study participants, and then they drop out because they just go, I can't eat that much protein. I get thirsty. I get so full. I can't eat all that. And that's how it works. It's really practically hard to eat too much protein. But the people who are doing the best in the masterclass and data-driven fasting are definitely on that. Once you get over 40%, up to 50% of your calories that you're intaking from protein, satiety just kicks in. You're getting on a lot of nutrients, and it just, the body says I don't need all this fat because I'm getting the nutrients I need, and I can lose all this excess fat. Yeah.
Talking about protein and how much protein, because that's always a big controversial thing about how much protein do we actually need. And I was reading that it's interesting that as you get older, particularly the elderly need a lot more protein, whereas they're the ones that are eating a lot less.
We think it's the athletes who need a lot of protein, right? But so
again, it ties back into that insulin resistance, gluconeogenesis. They're losing the protein they eat to the glucose in their blood, so they actually need to top up to make sure they can maintain lean body mass and satiety. So definitely as you get older, you need to prioritize protein, especially if you're not strong. And being aging well is so important. There's so much confusion and controversy and discussions about whether more protein will affect aging, and it's done in yeast and mice in laboratories. But in the reality, in the real world, people get to 70, they fall over, break their hip, end up in hospital and never get out of the hospital system. I think some 50% of people who break a bone in their old age are dead within a year. So from some other complication that flows on from that frailty. So having a good power to weight ratio when you're 20, 30, 40, 50, make sure that when you're 60, 70, 80, you're still going to be thriving. And I just want to be able to wipe my own bum for as long as I can.
That's right.
I thought I wanted to just deadlift and squat when I was 100, but I think wiping my bum's probably more important.
That's pretty much my number one life goal, is to be able to be independent.
Priorities, Nicole, priorities.
That's right, I had got it all wrong.
Independent toileting. It just looks like a good goal to have when you're 80 or 90.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Once you can't look after yourself and you've got people feeding you garbage in a nursing home, life is over.
Because that is the thing, right? That it's generally with the elderly, they do it's this very low protein really in the foods that they get served.
Definitely.
And also they have low stomach acid.
Right, and that's the thing, and that's why they reduce their protein, because they can't stomach it.
So that's that.
So that digestive acids and enzymes are really important the older you get, and so to be able to eat and absorb that protein.
Absolutely, yeah. You had another kind of interesting thing in the book as well. You talk about fat threshold, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, that along with the oxidative priority is just central to my understanding of how nutrition works, and it completely blew my mind. So the personal fat threshold, Roy Taylor in the UK did a bunch of fascinating work that basically showed that people develop diabetes at different levels of fat. So people from an Asian descent can develop raging diabetes when they still look quite lean and healthy, and you might think of them as toffee, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And other people who, the people on my 500-pound life who need a crane to get them out of their houses, those people don't usually develop diabetes and elevated blood sugars until much later. Their adipose tissue can keep on taking all that energy, and those people who think they're insulin resistant because they're obese often are actually insulin sensitive when they test their blood sugars. So.
So insulin sensitive is the outside fat, and insulin resistant is more the inside fat. Is that right?
Once your adipose tissue on the outside really fills up, it's like a sponge.
Gets to that threshold.
Once that fills up, it then overflows into your vital organs and your bloodstream. And you got a cool little photo.
A cool photo that I borrowed from Marty's book, just to kind of illustrate what that looks like. So if you can see there, this is what you can see on the right-hand side, what insulin sensitive weight gain looks like, which is more that outside fat, I guess, versus insulin resistant, which is more the inside, more the metabolic fat, the organ fats and all of that. You see the guy with the beer glass there, because that's typically, where you kind of start putting the fat on. So, I thought that was really interesting. So you were saying that one person may only put on a little bit of outside fat when they reach their threshold, and then they'll start going more on the internal fat, and someone else can put on a whole lot of fat on the outside before they get that very dangerous organ fat.
And it's that organ fat that's really dangerous in terms of diabetes and everything that flows from that, from cancer, heart disease, and everything we're really concerned about in our Western society that's going to send us bankrupt because of the diabetes epidemic. It's all due to when your adipose tissue fills up, overflows. You just need to find a way to eat, what to eat, when to eat again, that will help reverse that situation.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because we often think that insulin resistance happens and then you become fat.
It's actually the other way around.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
People blame their obesity on the insulin resistance, but you have to solve the obesity to become insulin sensitive again.
Yeah, and that's because of all that inflammation from the fat cells, and
you just feel everything just becomes toxic when there's too much energy and inflamed, and basically your sponge fills up and overflows, and you look inflamed and look unhealthy, and your body's just can't cope with all the fat and the carbs together. But if you just had fat or carbs with enough protein, your body go, I know what to do with this. It's just like that normal seasonal cycle where you get fat or carbs, but not both at the same time.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to fasting for a minute, because
me too.
I'm curious about autophagy.
We had a debate about how to pronounce autophagy. We had to look it up on the internet to see how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
Did you get the South African pronunciation?
I was actually right.
Right, yeah.
English being my second language, Nicole was wrong and I was right.
We always bag her because
autophagy, potato.
I mean, she says it in Indrapilli. I love it. Say Indrapilli because I love it.
Indrapilli.
I love it. She's very phonetic. She's very phonetic. So I'm like, no, it's autophagy. And she says, no, it's autophagy. And I'm like, no.
Whatever.
So we had to look it up. And she was right. Anyway.
Thank you.
What is it and how long do we have to fast before it kicks in?
Yeah, wow. Great question. And I suppose a lot of people, that's why people do fasting. I think there's this magical thing that happens after a certain duration of fasting, because there were these yeast worms that they tested, and the average life of a yeast worm is 7 days or whatever, and then there's the mice, and one mouse day is 40 human days. But if you say Walter Longo fasted the mice for 40 days and got these great autophagy benefits, but one mouse day is 40 human days. How long do I need to fast to get the same benefit of them? I'll be dead. Oh, that's not so good. And that's not a benefit, really. So what we do know is that having a good waist to height ratio and BMI and being, enough muscle, a good power to weight ratio is really good for our health and reverses all the risks of heart disease and cancer and all those sort of things. So you really, in my book, you have to find a way of balancing what you eat and when you eat in a sustainable sort of manner that gets you there over the long term. You can't expect to go, I didn't eat for a week and then I ate unlimited cheesecake and donuts till I didn't feel hungry anymore, and then at day 8 expect to be healthier than you were at day 1. And you're probably going to be worse off because you didn't get all the protein, you didn't get all the nutrients, and then you're just refilled with all the junk at the end.
Yeah.
And that's an important point, like what foods you break the fast with, isn't it?
Yeah, and leading with protein, it's the first thing. Your body needs protein. When you're hungry, the best bet is to give it the protein and nutrients it needs, and then you can backload with the energy from fat and carbs later on if you still feel hungry and can't eat any more kangaroo or chicken breast or whatever at that point, or tuna, or whatever you choose is your favourite protein.
Yeah, that leads me into another question, because we have a very big plant-based vegan population.
Controversial.
I know.
Very controversial.
Open up a can of worms. Yeah.
We're going to get banned on YouTube.
You could be cancelled, Marty. You could get cancelled.
We're not going to go into whether or not it's the right thing, but maybe physiologically with your insulin and the proteins and that sort of thing, and what's actually happening, and can you
can create a nutrient-dense plant-based diet with adequate protein, and especially if it's a vegetarian diet with dairy and eggs, but you have to be much more intentional because the proteins are less bioavailable. So for every gram of protein you eat, you need to eat a good chunk more to make up for the decreased bioavailability of that plant protein, unless you're eating exclusively soy protein, which has a better bioavailability. But then in terms of protein per calorie, you also have to eat a lot more. So the differential between getting all your protein from rice or beans versus getting all your protein from cod or protein powder, or it's a massive differential of the amount of food you have to eat to get the protein you need to create satiety and enable you to lose body fat and build muscle. So if you're going to do it, be very intentional about it and think it through. But we see people especially with vegetarian diets, doing really, really well and getting great nutrient density, but they have to be intentional. And plant-based can mean the donuts and cheesecake, or it can mean your spinach and broccoli and all those amazing nutrient-dense foods that are impossible to overeat. You're not going to, asparagus and spinach and alfalfa and watercress, they're incredibly nutrient-dense per calorie. They're impossible to overeat. Yeah. So if you stay up that, I've got this great graph of satiety versus nutrient density, and the most satiating foods are those non-starchy green veggies that are impossible to overeat. So if you just focus on those, you'll fade away to nothing fairly quickly. So you probably have to find some foods that have got energy, which then you come down to the seafood and if you can live on caviar and salmon and whatever, you're going to be doing really nicely if you can afford that. But then you come down to the beef and chicken and but right down the other extreme is the plant-based as well, the fats and oils and sugars and grains and all those refined products that food manufacturers combine with chemicals for flavouring and colouring and make it look like to our lizard brain that they're actually nutrient dense, which they're completely not. So those hyperpalatable processed marketed foods are tricking us into thinking something that's cheap, nutrient poor, low satiety is actually nutrient dense because it looks and feels like it's like hyper foods.
Smoke and mirrors.
It's food porn basically.
Yeah.
So it's not the real thing.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Definitely going to get banned.
And I guess that's a lot of times we see people on plant-based diets and they're not maybe don't have the knowledge to do it properly, and they're doing a lot of the grains and the processed oils and all that end of things, and then that's creating a lot of toxins and their insulin issues and that sort of thing as well. So you've got to really
definitely
be focused on what you're doing.
There's not enough vegetables and things.
And
you mentioned lizard brain quite a few times. Yeah, so
pretty weird as an engineer.
It is, and that's part of our brain, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have a lizard brain.
Yeah. I mean, we always think because we think that's all we are, but really we've got the instincts in our body. It's the part that is your instincts and keeps you alive, and even though you've eaten that many calories on MyFitnessPal, you still dream of the donuts because that wants to keep you alive. And really it comes down to the dopamine hit that those foods give you. We think of carbs are bad or fat are bad, and it raises insulin or too much fat, energy density, but really it comes back to your body wants to keep you alive, and you get a dopamine hit for doing things that keep it alive. So when it's autumn and you want to survive for winter, your body rewards you for seeking out those foods that are hyperpalatable, energy dense, and will give you all the nutrients really quickly. And so you get a double dopamine hit from those fat and the carbs together with the low protein. So you just get this reinforcing cycle of when you eat the donut, the cheesecake, the white chocolate, you just keep on eating those foods and you can't stop. But if you actually give your lizard brain what it needs with protein and nutrients first, it settles down and you don't keep craving those other foods. So you satisfy your instincts for what it needs, and then you eat less. So that's basically what we've done to reverse engineer that process to identify how different nutrients and protein provide greater satiety with less calories.
Yeah, because it is, it's combining the carbs and the fats, right? Because if you give someone a block of butter, they're not going to eat a whole block of butter. And even if you give them a bag of sugar, they're not going to eat the whole bag of sugar.
There's the bag of rice, go for it.
Yeah.
Or the most satiating foods in the satiety study from University of Sydney of the satiety index was the cooked and cooled potatoes. And
I like that because you went into that because potato chips, they've got the oil and that sort of stuff in it. And I like what you said. I think I listened to it on a podcast. You said how many
she was listening to a lot of your podcasts. That was the research.
Sorry.
I've got bags today because I listened to about 6 podcasts last night and read your book. But just a straight boiled potato. How many people can sit there and eat a whole load of that? Yeah, they can eat a whole tray of potato chips.
Yeah. And I'll for work I'll cook up some kangaroo patties, which are extremely high protein, but I'll also have some cold potatoes that Monty's boiled that I'll put in the fridge, and when I get hungry, put that in. And how many can you get through? Not a lot. And the satiety value of the protein and the carbs, or even the protein and the fat that comes with the protein, is very satiating. It's when you take out the protein and just mix the cheap carbs and fats together. So the amount of vegetable oil in our food system over the last 100 years is completely insane. It's like 700 extra calories per day per person. Crazy, it's just the cheapest thing you can buy and manufacture. So it's
And then it increases that dopamine hit as well.
Yeah,
right?
and then
so
you mix it with
whammy.
the sugar and the starch, and it's everything in the centre aisles with a barcode and a label, and it's really pretty, and it says low this or high this, or it's.
And what happens to people when they go off those, when they're on a health kick and they go off of those foods? They get depressed, right? Because they've been on that for so long and they've got that dopamine high, and they think, oh, this doesn't feel right, so they can't maintain it because of that. So it's
That's
interesting.
right. And what about gut health? You did have a chapter on fasting and gut health.
Wow. I think I'm not a gut health guru, and it's a very, very complex thing, and a lot of people do better by taking out a lot of the fibre and going to a carnivore diet, and that's a great elimination diet where you add things back in. But I think from a fasting point of view, we just eat too much all the time, and if you give your body a break, it can the microbiome can recover and settle down and be ready for another dose. But if you're always hammering it with food all the time because you're eating nutrient-poor junk that you've got a double dopamine hit that you keep on eating, no wonder your gut health is completely screwed.
That's right, yeah. Feeds all those organisms in the small intestine.
Any further questions, I'll refer to Elizma because she's the guru.
Yeah, we even look at there's certain bacteria that thrive in a fasted state, like Akkermansia. So we are designed to be in a fasted state.
But Akkermansia is associated with weight loss.
Yes.
Right. So that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
You had another chapter, which I'm going to challenge you on a little bit because a lot of our listeners are female.
I was just going to ask this question.
Wow.
Beat me to it.
I'll let you ask
No, you
it.
go. No, you started it now.
You had a chapter that says, how does that time of the month affect blood sugars for women?
Yeah, there's a number of things that affect blood sugars when you do data-driven fasting that we try to educate people to understand, and your sleep, your stress, and exercise, but particularly time of month, and definitely leading up to the period, there's definitely a period of insulin resistance, different cravings, blood sugars go up,
just before
insulin
the
goes
period?
up. Yeah, potentially. Like if you look at, I've spent way too much time looking at Moni's monthly insulin cycle and analysing that.
As you do with their female partners. Yes.
As I do, I've got a live guinea pig that I can analyse all her data. But sorry, hun. But yeah, definitely you get an increase in insulin, then it drops when the period comes. So during that time, you just have to accept that your blood sugars are going to be a bit elevated and try to focus on as higher quality foods that you can, and then just understand that when that's over, the water weight generally sheds and everything goes back to normal, and life is good. So yeah, there's definitely things you have to understand with blood sugars, and we put out an initial spreadsheet with data-driven fasting. People had 1 million questions and went, going insane. So I wrote a manual which has got 99 frequently asked questions, and that's one of them.
Is that the data-driven fasting manual?
Yeah,
because there was so many. It was great. I mean, it's like the Bible of anything you ever wanted to know about blood sugar and fasting. And
I did all this prep, and then Elizma comes in this morning and goes, "Hey, let's just use the 900 questions on Elizma. I stayed up till like midnight trying to prep."
But that's really good, right? So that's one of the reasons why a lot of women they feel more bloated and they get the weight gain and stuff at certain times. It's not our imagination, it's our blood sugar. And there's probably not that much we can do about it. It's just the natural rhythm and fluctuations of it. So we talked about the threshold, the fat threshold, and you say, and you have so how do we know when we've reached our fat threshold?
Basically, your personal fat threshold is the point where your blood sugar overflows, your energy in your system. I think a lot of the time we think sugar or fat and don't realise that they're interrelated, and you've got to burn off the glucose before the fat. But really, once your body fat fills up, then your glucose overflows into your bloodstream. So as you start seeing fasting blood sugar of over 100 milligrams per decilitre, or 5.6 millimole, then you're probably at a point where you've got energy toxicity to the point that you need to do something, waist to height ratio of greater than 0.5. There's a whole lot of other things you could test, but they're incredibly simple and easy to do.
So it's a measurement. So if you can measure your blood sugar levels, you can kind of gauge where your fat threshold is and when you should eat, when you should not eat.
Yeah, a lot of people say, how do I know when I've decreased back through my personal fat threshold? And it's like, you lose some weight, test your blood sugar, and when your blood sugar stabilises, then you're back within your personal fat threshold to the point that your body fat can hold the energy safely that it needs to. But if you still look in the mirror and go, I want to lose some more weight, then you probably just keep on dialing it back, and it's at that point you've probably dialed back your carbs enough, and then you need to dial back your body fat your dietary fat to dial back your body fat and continue the journey to improve your metabolic health, reverse diabetes, etc. Good things happen over here.
Awesome.
I do have a question because we're talking about fat loss. One of your keto lies was you have to be in ketosis to lose fat.
Yeah. Your body burns fat all the time, and ketosis is just a starvation mode that when you don't have glucose and protein in your diet to produce oxaloacetate, which is required in the Krebs cycle, it defaults off to ketosis, so it can supply a glucose alternative for your brain and all the vital organs that need glucose. So it's really just an amazing survival mechanism that you can default into, but your body's burning fat in the Krebs cycle all the time, and it's actually potentially more efficient. And you look at the Eskimos, they actually have a genetic mutation. You could probably talk for hours on this, that they, after generations and generations of living on a ketogenic diet, and everybody refers to them as the poster boys for the ketogenic diet, they actually don't produce a lot of ketones. The ketones aren't sitting in the optimal ketosis zone. That's probably the thing that triggers me the most, that I want to see retracted, the concept of optimal ketosis, that you have to keep your blood ketones over 0.5, and 1.5 is better and 3 is really great, but to get there you have to keep on loading in the butter and MCT oil, and then you look in the mirror. That's what I did 5 years ago. Looked in the mirror and went, I'm just getting fat. This is not healthy, whatever I'm doing. Keep trying to chase the ketones, but it doesn't always lead to optimal metabolic health.
Because definitely your weight loss started when you stopped the strict keto type of eating, and you started looking more at macros and micros and things like that, right?
And lifted heavy stuff. Do the exercise.
I mean, I would definitely, for our listeners out there, if you're into this, if you really want to kind of like be able to fine tune your body and just know when to eat, when not to eat, and just become lean and want to understand how all of this works, I absolutely urge you to get Marty's books, the Data-Driven Fasting Manual and Big Fat Keto Lies. Very cool reading.
Thank you.
Busts a lot of myths right open. It'll make you look at nutrition in a completely different way, but everything very scientific, very much. The numbers don't lie, do they? You look at the graphs, you look at the numbers, and that's just what happens.
It's hard to unsee, and I had to share it.
Yeah. That's right.
And you do have challenges every 6 weeks, is that right?
Yeah. We've got a nutritional optimization masterclass, which is sort of the high end for the nerdy people who are really motivated, where people get to track their food in Chronometer, and the nutrient optimizer tells them what foods and meals they need to eat. We've got a database of 400 now. It's insane. It's been so much work, but we've got it to the point where it'll tell you what meals and what foods you need to prioritize to dial in your micronutrients, and also we tailor your macronutrients to dial in your protein, then your carbs, then your fat, and then we compete for the nutrient density score. It's amazing how insane people get competing for optimal nutrient density, and on the leaderboard we designed this score of 100 that we thought no one could break, but people keep hitting it, so it's really cool to see that. But we've also got a data-driven fasting challenge for 4 weeks that rotates around. So every 4 weeks we do a challenge, then have a 2-week break, and then another challenge. We've got one starting tomorrow with 560 people in, so it's just completely blowing up. So it's taking over my life, but a whole lot of fun and just making all these.
Created a monster mind.
Yeah, well,
a good monster.
When it works, people just love it, and the community that's grown around it's very supportive and warm. And but it's very simple, I suppose. It's all about measurement, but it's about measuring the right thing and knowing what to do with that data. Where you can measure everything, and watches are about to come out with continuous glucose monitors embedded with them without having to insert a CGM. So hopefully, we're trying to position ourselves to be the ones that can tell you what to eat and when to eat based on all that data that usually confuses the heck out of people. So
you're coming out with an app as well?
Yeah, we've got a data-driven fasting app that's part of the challenge, and so people just enter their blood sugars, and it basically interprets it and tells them what to do with that data, which is really cool. As simple Simple is best.
Amazing. So where can they get hold of you?
Oh, wow. Too many places. There's optimizingnutrition.com, which is my blog. They can Google data-driven fasting. We've got a big page, and they can download the manual and the free baseline spreadsheet they can check out, and then jump into the challenge if they want. And then the Nutritional Optimization Masterclass, which is sort of come compete and see how nutrient dense your diet is, whether you're carnivore or vegan or we don't care. Just come one, come all, and try to dial in your nutrient densities. So, thank you so much. It's been such an amazing opportunity.
It's been great. Yeah. Just talk all day about it.
That's right. So glad that you could come, Marty, and we could have you actually physically in here with us.
Thank you so
much. You're a wealth of information. You know, I can sit and listen to you all day long and ask questions and pick your brain. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Okay, thanks, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And,
see you next time.
See you next time.